International Affairs Editor, Armen Georgian. Armen, it's great to have you with us. Listen, you and I spoke about this actually before the program. This is a conversation that's being had across the country. Why are we seeing more and more attacks like this in France, certainly in comparison to other countries in Europe?
Yeah, and there's obviously the obvious precedent is the Charlie Hebdo attacks in 2015, the attack on the killing of those journalists at the satirical weekly who published the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. Then, as now, there was this national outpouring. People said French secularism is under attack. In other words, the separation of church and state. And what we saw both then, perhaps slightly less now, but nonetheless, is a kind of French, coming together, France having a sense of itself in these kind of big moments, a sense of its history, of its identity. But, after the big moment is over, whether it's the big march after Charlie Hebdo or the commemorations yesterday, people sort of go back to their lives and the underlying problems persist. And to give you an example of that, Sanam, the Education Ministry recorded between September 2019 and March 2020, 935 cases where secularism was challenged in schools. Now, that means things like pupils wearing ostentatious religious symbols in their schools or challenging something that their teacher is saying in a lesson. And I think that statistic shows that it's almost impossible to regulate attitudes which are formed in the private sphere, outside the classrooms, in people's homes, in peer groups, in families, and so forth. Those attitudes obviously then manifest themselves in the classroom, and the risk for the French state in trying to change those attitudes in the private sphere is that they actually push French Muslims away, that they could then end up actually having more problems in the classroom, not fewer. But this is obviously a very difficult issue, whichever way you approach it.
It is a difficult issue because secularism is being challenged. On the other hand, we've seen an increase in Islamophobia. Now, Armen, in a bid to contain radicalism, we know that seemingly some might say drastic steps are being taken, among them the closure of a number of Muslim institutions, one that have actually been linked with radicalism. Tell us more about that.
Yes, so the mosque at Pantin, which is just outside Paris proper in the northeast, that is going to be closed for 6 months because there's a picture of it there, the Pantin mosque. The leader of the mosque, according to the Interior Ministry, shared a message on his Facebook page which denounced this class that Samuel Paty had given, so that the teacher who was murdered. There could be a request for judges to adjudicate whether that closure is legal or not, because the question is, does the mere fact of sharing a video equal commissioning an act of terrorism? So the burden of proof has to be that it has to show that there was an act of terrorism commissioned. So this is a question that judges may be asked to rule on. In terms of the other, what you said, Sanam, some might say radical measures, drastic measures, 50 associations which are accused of having links with radical Islam are going to be closed, according to the Interior Ministry. Now, that is obviously going to be controversial within sections of the Muslim community in France, because there are people in the Muslim community here who say that administrative decisions of this kind have gone against the idea of freedom of association and in favor of the state and in favor of security. So if you look at the number of places of where radicalization is thought to have happened, 356 places were closed since 2017. That includes things like unregulated schools and 15 places of worship. So there are those in the Muslim community in France who say, well, in theory, judges have to decide between freedom of association and security, but in reality, most of the time, judges actually rule in favor of the state and not in favor of freedom of association. So that's a criticism I think we're going to hear again.
And I think it's certainly to be seen whether the closure of these institutions will lead to the movement being pushed underground and becoming even more extreme. Armen Georgian, thank you so much for that really interesting conversation.
Thank you.